Happy ATV Fest. How's your festival going? Good? Good. All right. Some of you may have had a crush on him in the 80s. Some of you may have a crush on him in the 90s. Some of you might have a crush on him now. I have also had a crush on him that entire time. He has been in so many things that we have known and loved. He has been on stage and screen, and we are so happy to have him here today. The Raptor himself, Mr. Malcolm-Jamal Warner.
Hey, how you guys doing? Wow, thank you for coming out.
Show up, show out.
Packed in here. Wow, we appreciate it.
So I'm curious how many folks here watch The Resident. A lot, right? And do most of you know that they shoot here too? Yeah, all right. Anybody been an extra? All right.
Anybody want to be an extra?
Yeah, gotta get in line, y'all. They're still shooting.
We can work that out. Actually,
Exactly.
we've got a couple episodes left.
We'll have some forms outside. It's going to be great. So first, I want to talk about The Resident. So you were in part of the first season as recurring, and then you came on as a regular cast member. And I can imagine what attracted you to this guy, but tell us what was attractive to you, because he's really good at what he does, but he's kind of a dick.
Yeah, he is a dick. Which is that, obviously, I guess that's the obvious thing, that's what attracted me to him. Because I always, for those of you who are familiar with my work, I'm always cast as like the good guy, the nice guy, the sweet guy. When I got the audition, when I got the size for the audition, it was also at a place in my life where I really finally began to be comfortable in my own skin. Because I spent so much of my life, always concerned about what people think, and it's weird because I've said this, I've said this often, that the trick, the balancing act of being an artist is you want to be free enough not to give a fuck what people think about you, but as an artist, your success largely depends upon what people think about you. So I've spent just my whole life, the whole role model thing and just being a kid, in a professional adult environment. There was just so much of my life being concerned about what people thought about me. So I had gotten to a point, finally as an adult in my 40s, I got to the place where I was just really comfortable in my skin and not really tripping on how people take me and then take my honesty and take my authenticity. And I think that was the thing. I'd been chasing an authenticity, because when you live in the public eye, whenever you go outside of your house, you're working. So, no one cares if you've had a jacked up day. There's a certain energy that people are expecting. So I go outside of my house, hey, how you doing? Yeah, that's me. Hey, how's it going? And that was just such a part of my life that even though that's a part of who I am, I realized that, okay, but I don't have to, if I'm not feeling that at the moment, I can just be where I am, and people will just have to accept me for where I am. And if they don't, then I can't trip on that. So saying all that to say, when I saw the size for the Raptor, I was like, oh, wow, this guy, he's so arrogant that I need this guy in my life.
You need him to channel all of those times you wanted to tell somebody no for an autograph or a photo.
Well, not even that, just in life. Just like, this guy, here's a guy who is, he is the best at what he does as a cardiothoracic surgeon. And the beauty of it is he's not arrogant because he is overcompensating for insecurities. He is arrogant because he knows he has busted his ass and worked hard to get to where he is. So that arrogance comes out as someone he is just confident about who he is and what he does. And even though awake patients may not dig him, He is the person you want when you're in the OR.
When you're under, he's the man you
He's
want.
the man you
But I've
want.
been describing him when I tell people about the show that he's like the prince of surgeons. That like he just knows he's that good, and it's okay for him to feel that way. But you might not want to like hang out with him all
You
the
might,
time.
right, yeah. But now through the seasons, they've kind of, it's weird. They've kind of, calmed him down a little bit, so the arrogance and the confidence is there, but he's not as brash and as much of a dick as he was early on. And part of me kind of misses that.
But it's interesting because for a show that is sort of a combination procedural soap, basically, you do have things that happen every week that are new, and then you have the ongoing storylines of the different characters. You are able to have a pretty nuanced storyline for your character in a large ensemble, which is rare for this kind of show. And I'm curious, does that come out of conversations that you have, or that writers are just like, we want to give you this backstory about adoption and have David Allen Greer be your dad? Like, does it come solely from the writers, or do you have input on that?
It's most of it comes from the writers, but we're at a point where they trust me enough where if something doesn't feel right, I can go to them, and I guess there's a way that I communicate with them that they actually respect and actually listen to me. So you know, more often than not, if there is not an issue, but if there's something that doesn't sit right, or I have another suggestion because it feels more in line with the character, they're pretty much amenable to a lot of what I say, and they also allow me to ad lib a lot, which I really love, because there's so much of I'm so much in tune with AJ that just a lot of times things just come out and they tend to keep it, and I love that.
And if any of you are writers in here, you know how special that is.
Right.
That they're keeping his ad libs. But I
If
want to
there are any
ask.
actors in here, you know how special that
Yeah,
is.
exactly. Seriously. But I want to talk about Dag for a second because he's somebody that I think a lot of us came to him in comedy as we did to you. And then as the years went by, we learned that he had this great, dramatic background and went on to do dramatic things. And I feel like in some ways ahead of you, his career is somewhat similar to yours. So did you know him before this show?
I did not know David Allen Greer at all. I mean, I knew he was in A Soldier Story, and of course I knew him from In Living Color. I knew he was doing Greenleaf. I knew he was doing some other things, and really interesting. Because I'm all about transparency, and I think the reason why I'm here this year is because I was very transparent last year about things. But I wasn't really familiar with. I mean, of course, I respect anybody who was in The Soldier Story, but I wasn't really familiar with that dramatic side of him. So my chief concern, in all honesty, was okay. We have two people who are known for comedy, who are moving in the dramatic realm, and it's like I'm already busting my ass enough trying to, be in this realm, and to have someone else who's known for who's also trying to make the same transition. I personally felt that was going to be distracting. So honestly, I wasn't sure, and I didn't really have a whole lot of say in the matter because they really wanted him. So it was really a matter of like really being open and just seeing, okay, let's dance and let's see what happens. And I think it was our first day working, and whatever the first scene we did, I felt what's the word? It felt right, you know.
Just clicked. You were like, "Whoa."
Yeah. And I was like, okay,
We're here together.
Yeah, yeah, he gets it. Because again, I see him as the funny guy,
Right.
as people see me as the funny guy. So, fuck, am I talking about?
But I'm telling you, go see that man on Broadway sometime, and you will see
Sure,
that
yeah.
other side of him.
Yeah, and I remember because I started acting when I was 9 years old with one of Adolf Caesar's daughters. So, and I remember she posted on Facebook this old cast picture of A Soldier Story, and I'm like, that's David Allen Greer. So you respect anybody who was in that production, but having the experience of David, right there, and us doing the work. It felt good. It felt right.
Well, and speaking of casting directors, they know what they're doing. Trust them.
Yeah.
So, how is the experience here, being in Atlanta, working in Atlanta, or on the show? Have you enjoyed being in town?
I'm having the time of my life. And again, yeah, yeah.
You can do some pandering.
And I've worked in Atlanta before. Tracy and I did a season of Read Between the Lines, which I like to call the pre-Blackish. Um, so I was here for 2 seasons, and I have friends in Atlanta. For those of you who don't know, I'm also a musician, so I've played in Atlanta several times. The band that I use whenever I play anywhere in the southern region, are based here in Atlanta. So this really gives me an opportunity to, be an actor, but also be a musician, and that's been really fulfilling as well. My wife and daughter are here with me, which just makes it all, so much sweeter. The first season of the show, I was really only contracted to do the last 3 episodes of season one, and for a month and a half, I was here in Atlanta. My wife and daughter, and at the time, my daughter was maybe a year, 13 months, maybe. Not even that long, not even that old. But there was, as I was saying, FaceTime is like a really beautiful thing. It's great. You get to see your little daughter until she wants to touch you and she can't. And then FaceTime becomes a really heartbreaking thing. So when the conversations came up about being a series regular, the first thing my wife said is, "We're all going." I didn't sign up to be a single parent, so we're all going. And it's just really wonderful because I know actors who have to work away from home, and their kids are older, so they can't come out of school, and so they spend time away from their kids. But for me, it's so wonderful because my daughter is 2.5 now, so being able to be there and not have to miss anything and not skip a beat is wonderful. So I've got such a wonderful family life here. I've got a really wonderful actor's life here. I've got a really fulfilling musician's life here. So I'm having a blast here.
All right, yeah, that.
In the A.
And I'm so glad that you brought up the music. So I've spent the last few days listening to your record. So for those of you that don't know, Malcolm-Jamal is also an accomplished musician. This man has a Grammy Award. Yeah. And you're working with some Robert Glasper. Let us see. Layla Hathaway. Talk about Grammy Awards, Layla Hathaway. And so I'm curious, for the one that I'm going to recommend is Selfless from 2015.
That's the one, yeah, sure, yeah.
There's a track on there called Masked Magicians.
Master Magicians, yeah.
And then the one right after it's Signal Mixing.
Yes.
So these are the 2 tracks. Go to Spotify. They're back to back on this record from 2015, and I feel like they sum up the fun, sassy side, and then your very serious
Sure.
side. And so I'm curious, when the inspiration struck, he plays the bass and he does a spoken word thing that is not rapping nor singing, it's
Right, yeah.
poetry.
Yes.
And when this started, the inspiration for that.
Well, so Selfless is actually my 3rd CD. I started in the underground spoken word scene in LA, early 90s.
Oh, okay.
So I always like to make the distinction that I am not a celebrity who does poetry. I am a poet. My dad went to Lincoln University with Gil Scott-Heron and Brian Jackson. So I literally came out of the womb listening to Gil. So the poetry is a huge part of my life and a huge part of my expression. And it came at a point when I was doing a show called Malcolm and Eddie, which I'm glad you loved it. It was a horrible experience for me, and I know people love it. And I did Sway in the Morning one time, and I told him how much I hated that show and how much me and Eddie were not friends. I wrecked his whole day, and I'm sorry. But I mean, so here's the thing.
Some jobs are just jobs.
So I came from obviously the Cosby Show, and this was an environment for 8 years where Mr. Cosby made everyone ultra aware of the images of people of color we were putting on the airwaves. And when the show was over and I got to UPN, UPN's programming and marketing was the total antithesis of where I'd come from. But my thinking is, okay, well, they know I come from a history making show that shows that black people can be funny without being stereotypical. Um, I watched for 8 years how Mr. Cosby ran that show. So all the stereotypical things that you never saw on that show was not because the writers were not writing them. It was because Mr. Cosby, every week from year 1 to year 8, had to send these writers back to the writers' room because they were writing. If you think about the history of black sitcom in particular, there's a certain filter that writers through which writers see black people. And I get it. Everyone is creative. Everyone comes as a creator. So writers, they're creative. They want to put their creative spin on things. But clearly that show was Mr. Cosby's brainchild. It was most of those episodes came from his own monologues. Right, so he would literally be in the writers' room and talk the show out beat by beat. And the writers they had the pads and they had the tape recorders. And we would come to a Monday table reading, and there'd be so much typical black sitcom devices that they were writing. And Mr. Cosby was always clear on that's not what this show is. That is not the tone of of this show. That is not who this family is. That is not who these people are. Get rid of your drive-by mentality, writing for black people, and write the show that I'm pitching to you. So I watched him literally for 8 years do that week after week. So I figure, okay, I'm at UPN. I understand. I get the whole thing. So, and clearly they brought me over for a reason. Right. So, the problem was when I got there was my name was not Bill Cosby. Our show was not doing Cosby Show numbers, and they really didn't care what I had to say. They didn't care about my input. But I was already contracted.
Right, exactly. You were already
for
in.
the show. I was in.
But it's so interesting with that show in particular in the UPN. I mean, Fox builds every network builds at the beginning with black programming. It's just a thing that has happened throughout history, and the UPN did the same thing. And then eventually they move away from it. Yeah. And so we have OWN, and we have BET, and we have TV1. And I'm curious you are in a position now that is even different. As hot as you may have been in that moment, you are in a different position now as a veteran. And I'm curious, going from a UPN experience through Sons of Anarchy, through Read Between the Lines, if you think things have changed, because I'm not positive they had, but clearly you are closer to it. Do you feel that the way networks approach black shows is different?
Damn, did I talk about transparency earlier?
Well, don't get yourself in trouble, brother.
No,
but
right. So there's a fine line. I think in terms of life and in terms of images of people of color, I think yes, we've come a long way, but there's still so much further to go. I think a lot of what we have now are rehashed stereotypes, so they're packaged a little differently. We have roles where you see black people in a higher socioeconomic status, but the execution of the images are kind of the same. So it's always a fine. It's tricky because at the same time we have more black people working than ever in front of and behind the scenes. A lot of African American producers and directors and writers and showrunners and network owners. Like it's a beautiful thing to see, and without putting judgment on a lot of it, I would just say you have to look at what the final product is and really judge for yourself. Because my thing with Malcolm and Eddie was I was literally coming to work, literally fighting writers, producers, studio, network, fellow actor, and viewing public. Because the people who watched that show, they watched all of UPN's programming. And again, so not to, um, and it's tricky for me to talk about that because there are people who love Malcolm and Eddie. So, please don't get me wrong. You know what I'm saying? Like, I'm really not trying to fuck with your experience or what that show was. Like, I'm
But
sorry.
you have some insight into
know.
like what Chappelle was talking about when he was talking about people were laughing at the wrong thing. And in your situation, it was a level even below that you were making that thing. And you weren't proud of it, but you got to eat and you got to feed your family. But you also, I think, have to look at that. That's a step, though, in a way that's still a positive. That you had that show, Eddie had that show, and it was a step to a next thing.
Sure.
And like evolution.
But also the positive for me was even though I was feeling like Don Quixote going to work every week, it didn't stop me from fighting for the things that I thought were important. So even though I walked away looking at Malcolm and Eddie and the rest of UPN's programming, even though the gap was not as wide as I would have liked for it to be, I'm still proud of all the fighting and all the stuff that you did not see on that show, because it was also a matter for me was okay. I'm a part of the show, but at the same time, I cannot compromise who I am and my values for the paycheck. So it was a really precarious thing to have that balance, to do that balancing act. So I'm saying all that to say, 'cause I was also directing on the show, I was producing on the show, and I had a brand. So I have people who liked me, but wouldn't watch the show. So there was still my brand, there was still my audience that I had to think about as well. So I brought all that up to say that the poetry really saved me
Came out of that
because
frustration.
it allowed me to express myself in a way that I could not as an actor and as a director. So in a lot of ways, the poetry really saved me as an artist. And because the music and poetry took off the way it did, it actually reinvigorated the joy that had begun to wane on the acting side. So it really, as an artist, the music and poetry, I think, really saved me as an artist.
And part of maybe the savior aspect of that is that you weren't going into it thinking I'm going to sell a million records, right? Which is no shade on the music. I just mean like it was not the purpose of it.
Yeah. All of my records have been independently produced. This last record, Selfless, I actually did a digital distribution deal with Universal that I thought might have been cool because I didn't have to compromise any of my art. But the wonderful thing about the music and poetry that I was able to approach it as an artist. I wasn't looking to sell a million records. I wasn't looking to become rich and famous off of the music. It was an avenue of expression for me. This was music and subject matter that was important to me. It was music that I love. So for those of you who don't know my music, the band is called Miles Long. If you go to any place to look it up, you have to look up Malcolm-Jamal Warner's Miles Long. So if you just look up my name, you'll see like features and stuff I've done with other people. But in terms of the project that we're talking about, my records are Malcolm-Jamal Warner's Miles Long. But my core audience has always been people like myself who've grown up on hip hop, but hip hop doesn't necessarily have much to say to us as it did when we were younger. For people who, I always say it's a jazz funk spoken word band, but it's not straight ahead. So for me, it was kind of an entryway into jazz because like sometimes jazz can be a little too heady for people. So this was kind of when you get to the age where you want some sophistication to your music, but you still want to bob your head. So that's the audience, that's the market for my music. So for me, the music was a savior because I was like, okay, well, if I dig this, I know there are people out there who are going to dig this. and record sales. My bills are not going to depend on record sales. So it's a beautiful and wonderfully freeing way to approach my music. Unabashedly honest, and I guess the word of the day is transparent.
But I'm curious if as part of like giving no fucks about what people think has to extend to critics and social media commenters. And I'm curious if you were more, I don't want to say engaged with criticism of the music just because it's so much personal. Did you ever read anything and you're like, oh no, this is my heart, as opposed to somebody panning Malcolm and Eddie, which maybe your heart
Sure.
wasn't in the same way.
You know what the interesting thing about it, like you'll never hear me say I'm a great actor. You will never hear me say I'm a great bass player. But if there's any area in my life that matches how the raptor feels about his craft as a cardiothoracic surgeon, that's how I feel about my poetry. So there's literally nothing you can say to me about my poetry that is going to make me second guess
Right.
what I do as a poet. Now there may be some productive critiques that I'm totally open to and have gotten and have received well and have actually made some adjustments that have made me a better poet. But if someone tells me to my face that my poetry is whack, it's just because they just don't dig what I do. And I got to a point where I had to realize, like I used to have this thing about haters and why haters hate and yada yada yada. But I realized there are a whole lot of people that I don't like. You know, and like
Everything's not for everyone.
There are people I might not like, and I may not even be able to give you a real concrete reason why I don't like this motherfucker. So I totally accept that I am not everybody's cup of tea. And once I let go of that, like once I became okay with people not liking me, it completely freed me up because all I had to do was think about the number of people who actually do like me.
Which is significant.
yeah, but I think as artists and as people, I think we tend to, I think we all have this thing. We can be in a room with 10 people who like us, and then that 11th person who doesn't like us, we put our attention on that person. And
how do I make them like me?
Yeah, and it's really taking for granted, and it's a slap in the face to the people who actually are giving you love. So when it comes to people who don't like what I do, I completely accept it, and I totally get it.
It's funny, David Geffen, a very successful man. I know people have various issues with him, but one of the smartest things I ever heard him say was, "Your life is not made up of the people who are not in it." Like, let him go.
True that.
Like,
Yeah.
don't read the comments, y'all. That's all I'm saying. Don't read the comments.
Right.
Not worth it. So we have a lot of folks in here trying to get into the business. And for somebody with a career like yours, I'm always interested to hear how you pick your projects. Sometimes it's not up to you. Sometimes you got to eat. Sometimes somebody brings something to you. Do you have sort of rules you go by when you're making choices for projects that make sense for you?
Well, fortunately, just growing up, I've had good people on my team. My mother, in particular, business managers. So I've had people who gave me wonderful financial advice. So I have never been, thankfully, I've been blessed enough to never have to worry about doing a job for the paycheck. So even earlier on, when I used to be really judgmental and really critical about people who would take certain work that I turned down, like I've had a wonderful career. I've been blessed with a wonderful career, but I say no to more things than I say yes to. There's so many auditions that I will not go on. So between the auditions that I won't go on and then the auditions I bust my ass to get and don't get, I don't work as much as I feel like I should work. But So early on, I used to be really critical about people who would continue to perpetuate negative stereotypes of people of color. And then at some point, I came to the realization that, well, everyone doesn't necessarily have the financial wherewithal to say no to work. So once I accepted that, I learned to have a little more compassion and less judgment. So one, I've been very fortunate to, uh, the decisions I've made in terms of projects. It doesn't have to. There's no financial. Let's say there's very little financial consideration that goes into that. So then it allows me to be an artist. So now I think about. Um, I guess it's clear that I'm not interested in roles that are going to continue to perpetuate the same old thing. So then it goes into, uh, well, how challenging is this? Um, what? How is this going to stretch me as an actor? Um, who are the other people involved? Like, is this going to be a gig that I'm going to like? Am I going to like these people?
Geography, our
Yeah,
cast members.
yeah. Like they're jobs that shoot in Bulgaria, like places that I'm like, that looks really cool, but don't know if I want to do that. You know, but I think for me, it's what I respond to on a gut level, and again, most of those things that I respond to at a gut level and audition for, I do not get. So, as much as I have, again, been blessed enough to work, I have let's say, a 91% rejection rate. That's real. Like, think about it. As much as I work, I get told no 91% of the time. So the rejection in this business as an actor is, I mean, it's lethal. It's not for punks. It's not for the thin-skinned. And as much as I know that, as long as I have been in this business, there have been auditions that I get it. I know the game. So, not booking an audition is a way of life for an actor. But even still, there have been auditions that have taken the wind out of me that I really wanted and didn't get. And that's part of it. I tell you a great story about The Resident. Um, a great audition for me is when I go into the audition, I do the scene or do the scenes, and the director, producer, casting director says, "Oh, that's cool. Well, let's try it again this way. What if, And then they give you some notes, and then you go and you do it again. That's a great audition for me. A terrible audition for me is when I go in. They're like, "Okay, great. That was great. Thank you." And I'm like, there's another way that I think about this too. No, you're good. You're good. you know. So for The Resident, I went in and I went into casting, and just for some reason, I just felt like my game was off. And also, it's very rare that I go on an audition without seeing an acting coach. I have two different acting coaches that I see before almost any audition. And if I don't see them, it may be because it's such a last minute I can't get with them. But I always see my acting coaches. So I prepared for the audition. I did the audition, and after every scene, Scott was giving me notes. And for some reason, I just felt like I was so off my game that I wasn't doing it right. And I walked back to my truck in tears. And I got home, and my wife said, "Hey, babe, how was the audition?" Now, I talked to her about every audition, the good ones, the bad ones. It's a discussion that we have. And this one, I was like, "I don't want to talk about it." And she was like, "Whoa." So, yeah. So we didn't talk about it. And then 3 days later, I got the call that they wanted me to come to Atlanta to do these 3 episodes. and then it turned into a serious regular gig. So there's that. So there's
So
that.
you never know.
So there is that. But because it was only 3 episodes, I knew that I had to go back to. So by the third episode, which was the season finale, I knew I had to go back to LA and go back on that pilot season grind. So I'm on set. I'm in between scenes, reading scripts. So I'm reading this one script. It was a medical drama called Bellevue, and I said to Shanette, I'm like, "Yo, I have this audition for this role that is just like AJ." So okay, cool. Go back to LA. I'm like, I spent a month and a half doing this role. So I'm about to go in. I'm like, murder that audition, right? I went in, I murdered that audition. Walked back to my truck like, just waiting for the call. I'm still waiting for the call.
That is fantastic.
So then that show turned out to be New Amsterdam. And I gotta say, I'm not really familiar with the show, but I gotta say that I am so glad that they did not call me. Because had my deal not happened yet with The Resident, I might have gone ahead and taken that gig. So just for actors, no, not even for actors, not even for artists, for people, I'm really, one of my favorite sayings is, thank God for unanswered prayers. Because, things don't go the way we want them to go, but because they weren't for us.
Absolutely. We were saying this in the Mixed Dish panel earlier. Mark Paul Gosselaar was like, I'd take that audition. And she was like, you were amazing. And then he got the job. And but Passage had been canceled and he was sad. I'm like, dude, one door closes, another door opens. All right, it's time for you all to come start. Ooh, look at all them hands. All right, who we got? Over to your right.
Hi, my name's Gage Huff.
Hey, Gage.
I'm a film major here at SCAD. And my question for you, in regards to previous work you've done, how was your experience working on Community and working with people like Donald Glover, Yvette Nicole Brown, Ken Jeong, all those people, and just being on that set?
Yvette is still such a dear friend of mine. She is one of the most awesome people walking this earth. Funny thing about Donald was, I knew we had talked about music, so I knew he was kind of in the music, and I was in the music, and I gave him a CD. He was like, check out my band and whatnot. He was like, okay, well, go to this website and check out my music, and I was like, okay, I can't get a CD, okay, and I listened to that record, and I appreciated what he was doing. It wasn't necessarily my cup of tea, but I really appreciated okay, cool. It's not the same. It's not the part of hip hop with which I have such a love-hate relationship. I really dug what he was doing. I was like, Childish Gambino. That's such a weird name. What's going on? And the next thing I knew, Childish Gambino was the shit. But he was really cool, really just unassuming. Everyone on that show, the dynamic that you saw on air, it's really funny. There was so much of that dynamic off air. Just everybody was cool, but those relationships really kind of felt like, it was always also happening when the cameras weren't rolling.
It's like that sometimes. All right, good question. Who's next? We got some people in the front. Right here.
We have a question right here to you.
Oh, there you go. Over
Hi, I'm Elizabeth, sometimes extra, full-time mom. So my question's kind of regarding being a parent. And growing up, I watched The Cosby Show every Thursday night. That was such a great example of raising your children differently in the stereotypical black sitcoms. Mr. Cosby really was striving to make Theo work harder, be better. Do you strive as a dad now to be that way? I'm thinking of the Monopoly scene, budgeting money. graduation, cry like a baby, that type of thing.
So I actually, ironically enough, I used that Monopoly scene with my nephew. Yeah, it's great. Like my nephew at the time, he was 14. He knew of the shit, he had seen the show or whatever. But I popped in the DVD. He had never seen this particular episode, and I had him come over because there was some grout in my kitchen, between my kitchen tiles. I was like, wow, this grout needs to be cleaned. And like after a day of being on my knees and cleaning this grout with a toothbrush, I was like, I don't need to do this. I have a nephew. Right? So I called him. I was like, yo, Malik, I got $100 for you if you come over and do something for me. He was like, cool, bet. So he came over. It took him half the amount of time that it would have taken me to finish, And so when it was done, I brought him to the living room. I popped in the DVD, popped in that episode with Monopoly Money. He thought it was funny. He was like, it's funny. So when it was over, I was like, okay, well, you know what? I said I was going to give you $100. But you don't pay rent, so you should probably give your mom $20 for this. You don't pay taxes. And if you did pay taxes, they would take a chunk of your money. So $20 for this. So by the time I was done with him, he walked home with $20 in his pocket. And he wasn't bitter. Like he got it. Like he was smart enough to get it. And for me, it was just so surreal that I'm actually using that scene for my nephew. But with regard to that show, and again, I keep using the word surreal because it is so surreal to me, that the model for how I've always wanted my relationships to be was Cliff and Claire. And Cliff and Claire, not Bill and Felicia, not Felicia and the Mod, not Mr. and Mrs. Cosby, but that Cliff and Claire, there was just something really wonderful about the love that they shared. So that's something I've always modeled, how I want it to be in relationships. And interestingly enough, on my album Selfless, when we're talking about, there's a song called Brand New Day. And it's me and Lettucey and Robert Glasper and Tony Worcester Jr. And so the whole point of that record, by the way, was I had gone through, I was in a relationship for 6 years. And the 2 years after that relationship, I lived life like a man who was in a relationship for 6 years. So after that 2-year period, I was like, yo, I need to fall back and just kind of take some time and get some clarity for myself. So I went on hiatus from dating, relationships, mostly sex.
Should I follow up on that?
No,
Mostly sex?
Yeah, yeah. It was a significant drop in my action. But I was taking this time for clarity. So, and in the title poem, Selfless, that poem is really about, I think the end of the line is, I'm paraphrasing now, but it's basically, I don't want to be in another relationship giving my heart in pieces. So basically, I'm not going to be into another relationship until I'm willing to give myself, until I'm willing to give my heart selflessly. So in Brand New Day, and that song is about giving up bad habits, giving up negative thought patterns that are, no longer conducive to the productivity in my life and the level of life I'm trying to ascend toward. And the last verse in that song, the last line in that song, I say, so I'm holding out for that iconic love, like Cliff and Claire. And I met my wife the month I put that record out.
Manifest, baby. That's how it works.
But it's really dope. But the basis for me in terms of how I want to be have always wanted to be in a relationship. I wanted to be in a relationship with a partner where there was, mutual respect, um, of course, a whole lot of love, but more importantly, a whole lot of like. And the thing that I always walked away from with every episode, that even if Cliff and Claire had differences, it was clear they loved each other. You knew that, but they really liked each other. So more so than as a parent, modeling my life after that is really, really the relationship part. The parenting part is a whole nother thing, as you know. So my experience is, having these ideas and concepts about the type of father that I'm going to be. And if this happens, well, I'm not having that. I'm gonna do this. But when you're dealing with a live, baby person, you find that when you're in it, and if you are truly present to what's happening, all of those preconceived ideas go out the window, and you're really dealing in the present with what's happening right now. What does my child need? What is she trying to communicate to me? What do I need to try to communicate to her differently? Because what I'm saying is not necessarily landing. And again, my daughter she'll be 3 in May. So, we're in this wonderful developmental time where every day there's something different, something new. But I can't really. There's nothing I can base that parenting, my parenting on, or our parenting on, other than being present. And my wife is really good about. I watch her, and I learn from her, because my mother raised me a little differently. So there are some things that, may instinctively I may want to do or say, but I learn from watching my wife, and I see how she interacts. I'm like, oh yeah, that's actually, if I was a kid, I probably would have preferred that, And that's no shade on my mom, because my mom is like the fucking shit. I'm the reason I'm who I am. I'm the reason, she's a big part of the reason why you've never heard stuff about me, in the tabloids. She's the reason that I have always handled my celebrity with the responsibility that I've always handled it. So there's no shade on my mom at all. But she was 20 when she had me. I was 46 when I had my daughter. So there's just a different way of doing things. But I really credit my wife to a great extent for how I parent.
All right, we are this close to being out of time, so
Okay.
before we let you go,
I feel like
know this poor brother, he's had his hand up this whole time.
I feel like I dogged your Malcolm and Eddie
I know, and I was like, right there. But this one's it.
Hi, my name is Darius. Big fan, obviously.
Appreciate that, brother.
All right, my question is, I'm a writer/director, and I write a lot of comedy. And I want to know what was your process like for going from being like the funny guy all the time to being more dramatic? Like, when did you get that itch to say, hey, I want to be taken more seriously now? So,
Great question. The Cosby Show was actually my first comedy role. So during the whole time of being on Cosby, I always wanted to do more dramatic work. So outside of Cosby, everything I auditioned for, other projects I did, I tried to make them different from Theo. And I think Theo was such a part of me. There was such a part of me that was in Theo. When you spend, that many years and that young on a long-running series, especially a sitcom, because there's a different sitcom energy than if you're doing single camera. So I spent all of my life post Cosby trying to get that sitcom energy out of my system. So though there were roles that I would choose where the roles may have been different from Theo, I think often there was still a little Theo. You still saw a little Theo in those roles because, again, Theo was such a big part of me. Malcolm was such a big part of Theo. And I feel like with The Resident, I think there are two things. Just before The Resident, I did a recurring on Sneaky Pete on Amazon. So I think that was like the first thing where I started to see like 90% of Theo kind of go away. And then with The Resident, like I feel like I finally I have finally reached the I feel like I finally gotten a handle. I finally gotten the handle on my craft that I've been chasing since Cosby. So that's one of the reasons why this show is so fulfilling to me, because I feel like, yeah, on paper the role is there, but I feel as an actor I'm finally doing work that is not Theo. Yeah, and at a Television Critics Association event, I think like 2 years ago. So it was the first year, I think our first year, and the first year of Barry. So Henry Winkler, who I adore, who is one of the sweetest people in the world, and of course, we have similar, because Henry Winkler was the Fonz on Happy Days, and now he's killing it on Barry. So I saw him at the TCA, and he was asking me, how, what I feel about the show, and I told him that, like, I'm finally getting the handle on my craft that I've been chasing since Cosby. He said, "You know something? I just told somebody that earlier today. I had an interview, and I told the guy I was 27 when I was the Fonz, and now at 72, I'm finally the actor that I wanted to be when I was doing Happy Days." Oh my God, that's amazing. Yes, and I was like, like it never ends. Like, as an artist, you're constantly evolving. And for this man who's been in the business, longer than I, and at 72, he's found that. It was just so inspiring to me. And if I know we have to be done, but if there's anything that I can impart on all of you as artists, always strive to grow, because there's so much to learn. And the most difficult part about that is when you're doing well. Right. And when you're on that stride and just everything is popping and it feels like nothing can go wrong, that's where everybody fucks up. Yeah. So the hardest part is to keep yourself in check during the successes. Because one of the things my mother imparted on me early on was, if you want longevity in this business, you have to understand that there are going to be times where you are hot, and there are going to be times where you're not. They're the peaks and valleys. So the things that she always made sure that I was ultra aware of was, when you're hot is the time to bust your ass. So when you're not hot, you aren't making desperate career choices because you have to pay the bills. So you always, and this business is peaks and valleys. It's ebbs and flows. So, when you as artists get on that hot streak, whatever level you're on, whatever, you may feel like it's a hotter streak than what it really is.
Yeah. Complacency is a killer.
Yeah. But whenever you feel like you're on that hot streak, just keep in mind that if you're in this business for the longevity, it's cyclical. It goes through phases. You're going to have this hot streak, and then you're not. And then when you're in the lows and you're in it for the longevity, you have to keep in mind that it's cyclical. This is just a phase. It comes back around again. You just have to stay in it long enough for it to come back around.
Amen. And save your money. And on that note,
Save your money.
Thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for being here. Have a great rest of your festival.
And thank you guys for coming. I appreciate your attendance and your energy. So thank you.